that are required to keep the system running. Lines, not just the oil production itself, the wells, and so the wells, in order to maintain the well, you have to have continuous production and continue to maintain pressure. If you stop production precipitously, you can create issues with well maintenance. So maintain the wells by when you pump, you have to load it, store it someplace, and then take it to a refinery that refines. Refineries have to be in constant motion. You don't want them shut down. And then you have pipelines that need to be constantly streaming energy. We're at the point right now where by June, we'll start to see major disruptions in the energy supply chain. And by September, if we don't resolve this, we're going to see a total collapse of the global energy supply chain, meaning refineries are going to be shutting down. And when they shut down, they don't just start up. Pipelines are going to be emptied, and wells are not going to be producing and are actually probably not going to be maintained consistently, which impacts future production capacity. So we are literally looking at a global energy security catastrophe that will impact everybody. I know, Alex, you're in China. China's not immune to this. China is going to pay a very heavy economic price if this doesn't get resolved, which is one of the reasons why I think China is heavily involved diplomatically. The Russians, too, while they won't be involved in terms of their maintain and produce. This Russia needs stability. Every oil producing nation needs stability in the global markets. The last thing you want is an unstable global market. Even the United States, we claim to be energy self-sufficient, but the fact of the matter is, it comes with a cost. You're tied to a global market, and therefore, when the price of oil goes up globally, it impacts us here at home. And one only has to look at the. I don't know what the price of gas is in Las Vegas right now, but I know in New York it's gone up over $1 in the last week. The oil economy, of course, back in the early 70s, we had the oil embargo that to a energy crisis here in the United States and the West. But linked to oil, a lot of people don't look around the desk, look around your home. Understand that almost everything in your house is produced using petroleum products, everything. And the food you eat, believe it or not, the urea that's used to create the fertilizer that's used to make the mass growth of food possible is, comes from oil products. And it's not just oil that's not being shipped out of the Middle East. It's urea, it's the fertilizer byproduct, ammonia. It's helium, which is an essential product in modern technologies. There'll be a helium shortage. So the technology that we think we have that's going to compensate for other things is going to come. The entire world's going to come to a standstill. This is the reality. We haven't had significant energy flow into the global system from the Middle East since February. Ships that you talk about, container ships, but tankers, our states last week. And there is going to be a shock, a tremendous crash that's going to take place. It's going to take place in June, July. It could extend into August if we don't resolve this. We need to get the Strait of Hormuz opened now. But even if we get the Strait of Hormuz opened, understand that oil production in the Persian Gulf region has, come to a halt. It's going to take some time. Qatari gas isn't going to flow automatically. They have to repair pipelines and they have to get systems back up to liquefy the gas, to load it onto ships, to ship it. That's going to take weeks, if not months. So even if we resolve the political problem, the logistical problems are still there. This is going to be a very, very hard summer. Take a look at Europe and commercial airline traffic. Lufthansa canceling 20,000 flights. They may have to shut down the totality of their operations because not only can they not afford the fuel, there is no fuel. There's an aviation fuel shortage that isn't going to be resolved. because the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And this will have an impact on the United States. We may not have the same fuel shortage they have, but it's going to cost us a heck of a lot more to travel this summer. And even before we haven't calculated in what's going to happen, but early on in this conflict, it was estimated that this war was costing Americans $410 more a month. And I think that number's probably gone up to closer to 600. Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. There's not a lot of extra cash floating around. And so when you start eating into, incomes, that significantly, you're going to also create a crisis. What happens this summer when people are unable to pay their bills, pay their mortgages? We see now, escalating, crises related to this. So we have no clue what's going on. And the president is lying to the American people. Congress is lying to the American people. And there will be a political price to pay come this summer. Bill Clinton warned us all back in 1992 with that little yellow sticker that somebody stuck on the door of the war room. It's the economy, stupid. That is literally the only thing the American people truly care about. Everything else is peripheral. Guns, yes. Abortion, yes. But war, yes. The only thing that truly matters, the thing that drives Americans at the voting booth, is the economy. And when this president crashes this economy and is unable to pull it out of a nosedive, there will be hell to pay at the polls come November. And this is another reality that's looming. When Trump and his advisors start talking about what needs to be done, they don't have any time left. They have zero time left because, again, as Alex talked about, the time it takes for things to sail and get to where they want. Even if we solved all the problems today, there's still going to be a crash that isn't going to reverse itself till late July. And that's almost too late for November, almost too late. This president has no time left, none whatsoever. And yet it doesn't appear that he's psychologically capable of doing the right thing. This is a man who continues to have conversations with himself, debates with himself. He lives in a fantasy world of his own construct, saying things are going to happen that just simply aren't going to happen, out of touch with reality 100%. And he's surrounded by sycophants who only further this kind of, warped thinking. Pete Hegseth promoting the idea that America has a military capable of doing anything. We're an embarrassment. Now we can talk. This goes beyond Iran. This goes into China. China now today has answered some very fundamental questions. America sucks. China doesn't have to worry about American air defense. It's been demonstrated to be absolute crap. China doesn't have to worry about American long-range strike weapons because they've learned the lesson from Iran that they're not the invincible weapon they think they are, and there's a finite amount of these, and they've been expended. China's actually, the irony is China's in control of America's ability to rearm because much of the technology we need to acquire to produce these weapons that we've expended in large numbers comes from China. And so, the Chinese actually hold the key to America's ability to rearm. Most Americans have, that fact has escaped them. In Europe today, if you think the Russians now are fearful of the United States, they're not. Everybody's concerned about nuclear weapons. That's a different issue. But, the United States as the bulwark that supports Europe is no longer there. It's been exposed. It's not a solid spine of steel, but it's a rusted, collapsing artifice. And Europe itself is nothing. And so this Iran war has exposed the military fallacies that have been attached to the notion of Western military supremacy. It's dashed forever. Russia and China today can rest easy knowing that their military capability is more than sufficient to defeat the United States in a stand-up conventional war. A viable alternative is the Democratic Party, but Hakeem Jeffries does not inspire confidence. He's one of the most corrupt individuals out there. You can show the stock market up, but the reality is what's come across is that the stock market benefits the wealthiest at the expense of the average investor. I can guarantee you the average investor's portfolio, the gains that you're talking about, because the average investor is treated as a sucker or somebody who's something to help underwrite, to help generate the money that is stolen by fund managers, and then the people who gain the system more effectively through inciting aren't matching the results that you see there. Really, isn't matching those resuls.
Yeah, let me bring up something, Scott. I just want you to have a look at this next slide I want to bring up here. And you mentioned it.
Now, this is criticized today, rightly so. I mean, I make criticism. I've been, and I believe I'm 100% correct, that we have to, when we speak of the Trump administration, we can no longer use the standard analytical framework that we would use, whether in geopolitics or finances or anything, because we're not dealing with an administration that functions the way governments are supposed to function. We're dealing with not a chief executive, but a cult of personality that has broken free of constitutional constraint and restraint, operates free of checks and balances in near dictatorial fashion, to the whim of a man who is diagnosable as a malignant, narcissistic, personality disorder-stricken, mentally ill person. Now, this is where I got in trouble because this person who I consider to be a very good friend said, you have to stop saying this, Scott, because you're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and you're not in a position to diagnose someone like this. And it just makes it sound like you're angry and spiteful. And I agree. I shouldn't say that out of the blue. But, what I will say is this, that I have worked very closely for much of the world, especially the Middle East. We have these Gulf Arab countries that have built financial empires, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and it's all everything they do is dependent upon data, and the data that flows in comes from these undersea cables. They've always been vulnerable to interdiction. One of the fears was that Iran could cut these cables. Just today, Iran announced that. I mean, I just have to laugh again because according to Donald Trump, there is no Iranian Navy. But according to the Iranians today, they are deploying for the first time a class of submarine. It's a small submarine that operates in the shallow waters of the Persian Gulf. American Navy can't interdict them because our big submarines can't come into those shallow waters. They'll fall victim to this, and our ships can't approach for AWS, submarine warfare, ASW operation, because it's shallow water and they'll be sunk. And these subs are perfect for that kind of mission, to interdict the cables. And so I think, it's the greatest irony that Iran might now be in a position to replicate the tolling that it does for oil tankers and ships through the Strait of Hormuz, and start charging an internet access fee. I just think it would be wonderful if Iran did that again, because I think the world miscalculated. I don't view any of the Gulf Arab nations as victims. They're all perpetrators. They were all active parties to this conflict, and they have no rights. They are defeated nations. They lost the war. They gambled. They chose with the wrong side. And I just think it's wonderful that Iran is in a position to make them pay. I mean, I think what we have to understand, though, is that Iran, it's fighting for its sovereignty, but Iran, in the long term, it can't be a nation standing alone. They can't go to war against the entire world. This conflict wasn't just about Israel urging the United States to go to war against Iran. This was a conflict that the United States made an independent assessment and said this furthers our strategic goals and objectives against China. China is very much a target of this war for the United States, because just like we did with Venezuela, we were planning on taking control of the Iranian oil market and denying China access to it. Iran has to be careful because the Chinese have a vested interest in this conflict. And I think a lot of pressure is being put on Iran by China to find an off ramp. And so, I think that's why you're seeing the Iranians respond as a saying, pound sand, because they do hold all the cards. But that's the card game they're playing with the Trump administration. They don't want to be playing a card game with China. They want to make sure that the Chinese interests are respected. But China also acknowledges that there's the issue of Iranian sovereignty that can't be tread upon. So, a deal, will not have Iran forego its right to enrich permanently. There may be a cap put on it, a time frame. There might be some restrictions put on it, but the idea that Iran is just going to give up enrichment altogether and give up its nuclear program altogether is absurd. Iran will not do that. So I think there might be some movement on the nuclear side where Iran, is willing to. Vladimir Putin the other day mentioned that Iran was willing to transfer the enriched uranium, the 60% enriched uranium, to Russian control to be disposed of in that manner. That may be back on the table. There might be other restrictions, maybe going back to the deal that the Omani government helped broker before this war began. So I see some flexibility there, but they're not going to give up the nuclear program. In America, that isn't going to happen. Ballistic missiles aren't even on the table. Iran won't even entertain that notion. In fact, today Iran came out and said if the United States attacks another Iranian tanker, then Iran is going to launch missiles at American bases and American ships. So Iran is the one setting the terms now. It was Washington, D.C. trying to, box the Iranians, and the Iranians have countered and said, no, we hold the cards and we will blow the hell out if you out. So I don't see flexibility there. On the Strait of Hormuz, I don't see Iran giving up control. Iran agreeing to maybe have a partnership with Oman on the Strait, some sort of partnership thing. But I don't see Iran giving their Trump. I do see Iran allowing compromises to be made on the nuclear side, power of the Trump administration to claim they have a better deal than the JCPOA, which would be a political victory for Donald Trump. I do see Iran willing to make some compromises to get the Strait of Hormuz opened, which will again give Donald Trump the ability to declare a political victory. But the United States has to lift the blockade. That can't be allowed to happen. Iran's not going to make concessions without that. And the other thing is the United States has to lift this and has to return the seized assets. And the United States keeps talking gradual. Well, that's a word that means never when we talk the United States. So these are things that have to be done up front. And this is where, again, I think the upcoming visit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in China is going to be absolutely important. I think, but the tone of this meeting is going to be completely different than I had anticipated. When he first planned on meeting Xi Jinping, I think last month, he wanted to bring both Venezuela and Iran with him and throw it and say, we are in control here. We are in charge. You need to listen to us and bend to our demand. That isn't happening. And I think it's around the Chinese are going to say, please, Mr. Trump, have a seat. Let's have a conversation about what we can do to save your ass. And that deal was had some problems as well from a optics standpoint. Understand that Iran has never been shown to a desire for nuclear weapons or to have a program dedicated to producing nuclear weapons. Never. There's been assessments from Israel and the CIA that talk about early on these programs existed, but it's never been proven. And today, it's pretty much demonstrated that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program and seeking to do one. In fact, just the opposite. They don't want one. But when you look at the JCPOA in 2015, it was predicated on the need to create a 1-year breakout time. So if Iran, the agreement was designed so if Iran decided they wanted a nuclear weapon, and decided to violate the restrictions placed on them, it would take 1 year. So for them to acquire sufficient enriched material to produce a single nuclear weapon. That's a flawed way of approaching Iran's nuclear program, and that was proven because Iran was never going to allow permanent restriction of its ability to enrich, and so the JCPOA had these sunset clauses that basically allowed these restrictions to ease over time. And by the time the final restriction eased, the notion of a 1-year breakout window was laughable because Iran would be allowed to produce and deploy the most advanced centrifuges. There was no restriction on the amount of enriched uranium Iran could accumulate. And so therefore, the idea of a 1-year breakout window is mooted. By the time the sunset clauses were lifted, the breakout window would be measured in terms of weeks. So if you're using a 1-year breakout window as the benchmark upon which to judge the efficacy of the JCPOA, it was a joke. And Obama said so. In April, before the agreement was signed, someone said, "What happens with the sunset clauses?" And he said, "Well, we hope that the agreement actually provides enough time for Iran to reconsider their nuclear program in its totality, and so that this won't be an issue when those comes up, meaning that Iran would voluntarily step down."